Morning, Doug.
There's the mute button. Hello, how's it going?
Awesome. Did I miss it last week that Remy has a baby?
That's the rumor. Yeah, I don't know which number it is, but I know it's at least number 2 because I've seen pictures of him with at least one kid.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Daniel.
Hello.
And hey, Eric.
Hey, Doug.
Oops. Hey, Scott.
Morning.
All right. Oops. Hello, Hal.
Hello.
And Tommy.
Yo.
Yo. Where would I be without my weekly yo? Hey, Christian.
Hey, Doug.
Hey, John.
Good morning.
Hello.
Wait, who was that at 925?
This is John Mitchell.
That's it. I should recognize the number. Sorry about that, John.
You're getting old.
I am getting, don't tell me about it. Thank you for the reminder, though. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's why we have friends and why we have kids.
Exactly. Yes. So while we're waiting, John, did you want to hold off till next week, or do you want to try to talk about your schedule?
Yeah, given that I suspect it could take quite a while to discuss, and we could give, if you could give another reminder to have a look. It looks like some people have been looking already, but obviously the more people who've really had a read and then pondered over it for a bit, the better.
Okay, sounds good. Hey, Lance. Oh, shoot. I lost my window. Hold on a minute. Hey, Lance.
Hey, Doug, this is Jesse.
Hey, Jesse. Lance, are you hiding out? Oh, we lost Lance. He vanished. No, he isn't. There he is. Lance is just hiding.
Doug, my audio was muted, so I don't know if you asked to confirm my presence or not, but I'm here.
I did, and thank you for speaking up. So you can ignore the chat message.
Okay.
All right, just give one more minute, they'll get started. I was actually kind of hoping Klaus would show up because I wanted him to lead the discussion on something, but we'll see. Hey, Ryan.
Hello.
Okay, tell you what, why don't I go ahead and get started? Let's see. Okay, anything from the community that people want to bring up that's not on the agenda? All right. We do have a Discovery Interop call this week. Last time I checked, there was no issues in the agenda or no topics in the agenda. So if you have something, please add it before the end of this call. Otherwise, we will adjourn early. Let's see, KubeCon. Nothing's really changed there other than, I can't remember when it was. I think it was very late last week. Scott did reach out to me saying he'd be interested in presenting the cloud event stuff for us there. So we managed to get my name swapped out for his. So thank you, Scott, for volunteering to do that. Let's see, anything else? I don't see Timur on the call. Yeah, in person. Okay, so Timur is not here on the call to talk about workflow. So let's go ahead and jump into PRs. Are there any issues or PRs that people thought I should have added that I forgot to add? Okay. I have a new batch of issues for people to take a look at. Please look at those when you get a chance, preferably before the end of the week or end of the weekend. I think these are the 4 that we can close. I put a comment in there to draw people's attention to it, but please take a look at those if you get a chance. And thank you for those folks who do go and look at them and add a thumbs up or +1 or whatever to my comment about closing them. That helps me verify that it is someone else, that there is someone else looking besides just me. So I appreciate that. So thank you. All right, so let's jump right into it. Eric, you are up first. How would you like to talk to this one?
Well, I'm not sure how much there is to say. It's mostly a kind of cleanup and refactor. I talked about it last week, but I went through a yak shaving exercise where I wanted to try and add the history or kind of a replication capacity and just there was a lack of synchronization between the Open API and the specification itself. So I was going through the specification. It seemed to not kind of meet REST standards and have a few other inconsistencies. So I've attempted to clarify. It does change the API a bit. I feel kind of bad about this since it's been out a bit, but it's also first, V0. So yeah. Okay. Is there anything in particular you'd like me to speak to?
No, I know it's a fairly large one. Does anybody have any, let me ask a question. There were some comments added to it. Do you think you addressed all the comments? I haven't had a chance to look at them since last night when I stopped making comments. I know you commented after that. Anything in there that you did not?
What I attempted to do is anything that I feel like it was really clear and obvious what the right thing to do was, I resolved that and then checked in some changes. There were some matters where I felt like it was maybe a little more ambiguous about what the right thing to do was. So I responded accordingly and left those open.
Okay. When I was reading through it, I did not get the impression that there was anything significant or really questionable. It was more just, stylistic changes for the most part, although you did say to change the API. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, from my perspective, I didn't come across anything that felt like it wasn't something we couldn't merge now and then address later through another issue, right? I don't think there's anything bad in here that would completely ruin the spec if we merged it today. So let me ask for the folks on the call, do people want more time? Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead and speak up for anything related to this issue. Otherwise, if no one speaks up, I'll ask if we can merge it. So if you want more time, please speak up.
I would probably like to have more time.
Okay, fair enough.
So
okay,
I saw it this morning, and I just didn't have enough time to read through everything. I find it very interesting.
Okay, that's fine. Just out of curiosity, do you think 1 week will be sufficient for you?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, cool. Okay. Eric, I assume you're okay with another week delay, right?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, I didn't think you were in a hurry. Okay, cool.
No, I know it's a very big one, so
yeah,
it seems appropriate.
Okay.
Thank you to everyone who's put time into reviewing it.
Yep. Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Eric while he's on the phone that he can answer related to the changes? Okay. In that case, please review it, and we'll try very hard to see if we can officially merge it or vote one way or the other next week. Okay, cool. Well, here, just make it official. Even though this person still needs to do their DCO stuff. Oh wait, did they do it? No, I don't think he did. Yeah. Just a typo. I'll get that in there once they do their DCO. Although I might let it go in anyway. It's so small, but I assume no one's going to complain about that. Okay, another one. Klaus, if it's okay with you, I'd like to kind of lean on you to sort of drive the discussion around this one, because to be perfectly honest, I only had time to review Eric's PR. I didn't get a chance to review this issue. So maybe if you can help summarize for other people like who are in the same position as me, who didn't get a chance to look at it yet, in terms of what's going on and where the discussion is at in terms of possible resolution.
Okay, so I didn't really have time to look at the recent posts there. I think some people from the different SDKs posted how their according SDKs are handling this aspect of the data content type. And as I said, I wanted to go through all those differences and compare basically, but I just didn't find the time yet. But I think it's if there are differences in the way those SDKs are handling it, it's potentially an issue for interoperability. As if you send something in JSON JSON format with one SDK and then receive it with another one that assumes has different assumptions how to handle certain content types, then it could lead to problems.
Maybe it would help if you could sort of summarize the issue that he's bringing up here.
Okay, I don't even know if that's still that it's been a long discussion. So I think it went back and forth, and in the end we landed at that aspect that at least for the JSON format, you have those two ways to express data in database 64, and for data, it might be that if it's a JSON-based content type, that the whole JSON value, so here on the right-hand side of data is taken, and that's important if you want to forward the very same event in binary, because then you take everything in this example, including the quotes, and put it into the body of what you are forwarding. In case it is understood as a text, you would strip the quotes and just put the text into the body if you forward that event. So I suppose all SDKs would need the same understanding for which content type they assume it to be really JSON and for which it's text. So I don't know if others have better ways to describe that issue.
Okay. And so I'm trying to
I
wrap
think
my head around.
in one of my answers further down, there were some more examples also with the others that discussed. I think even further down. That's
Well, let me start. Okay, let me start at the bottom and work my way up then.
Yeah, a bit up. Yeah. So that's what the different maintainers of the SDKs wrote, and a bit more up, I guess. Yeah, here I think.
Okay.
Is it this one? Oh, maybe one more up. Sorry. Yeah, that's better, I think.
Okay. Talk about which one you want to look at. This.
Yeah, that one. Maybe. Yeah. So so if you compare the JSON format with, for example, protobuf or also the PR that exists for XML, they clearly distinguish protobuf and text, for example, or XML and text, and that's the distinction we don't really have explicitly in JSON. And if you, I try to make it clear by introducing this data encoded. I think that's also how it's called somewhere internally in the SDK, in the Go SDK. So it's a value that is not passed. And if you see here, the string that contains JSON, I think it is more or less double quoted here. And that's what I try to illustrate, because it's really understood as a string. Maybe one more up. I think there were my examples, I think, yes. So it started with this example, with this CE1 example that someone else made. And it was this JSON object that was transmitted as string.
So where does the confusion come in here? Because this to me looks like a string.
Exactly, it's a string value. And but the problem is, depending on the data content type, you would understand it differently. So, for example, if you don't have application JSON, but you have, I don't know, maybe even something plus JSON, then maybe some SDK would, so it's the string is a JSON value, and that is why it works. But if exactly, so okay, now I think I got it again. It's really confusing. So
yes.
In this case, if you forward it as binary, the body would contain a JSON value, but that would be a string. If you if the SDK did not see that this is JSON and it would interpret it as text, it would strip the quotes and would and all of a sudden you would have this object as the body. I think that's the difference. That's what I try to further down. You have this data encoded, these confusing double quotes and everything that try to illustrate this.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Scott. I didn't notice your hands up.
Yeah. So the in the Go SDK and kind of some of the first versions, I actually did attempt to parse a strings. If a string came in and got set as the data, but inside the string happened to be a valid JSON piece, I would like probe it and parse it and see if it worked and then try to guess, especially when data content type was left empty. That all got taken out because I think it's a bad plan for the SDK to make those assumptions. And they're, if it is just a string and it happens to contain valid JSON that's string encoded, what's the downside of assuming that it's just a string, a JSON string?
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. I think there is this data as function or something like this if you want to interpret it as JSON, right? But still, you I think also in the SDK source code, I saw this distinction that for, at least by default, for text JSON and for application JSON, it was treated differently than for other content types. In one case, you included the quotes, and in the other cases, you stripped them.
So is the issue here really just first figuring out what we want and then figuring out which SDKs are doing it incorrectly and convince them to change?
I think we didn't really clearly define it, so you couldn't really say that any SDK is doing it incorrectly. I think that's the problem, and that might create interoperability issues.
So is this example here an example where different SDKs interpret it differently?
I think here the risk is minimal because the content type is application JSON, and I would expect that most SDKs or all SDKs actually treat this the same way. But there might be edge cases with some arbitrary content types with a plus JSON in the end, and there might be differences.
I'd say the fact that the data in that case happens to be a string representation of JSON is actually slightly confusing, because the application JSON content type, imagine that data was just XYZ, but in a string. Certainly in the C# SDK, the fact that it's saying application/JSON means when we parse it, we would say, we should parse that as a JSON value. So you end up with, depending on which API you're using, a JToken or whatever the system text JSON equivalent is, a JSON token that happens to represent a string. And if the value was 50 instead, not in quotes, you get a JToken that represents a number. So I think the fact that it's that it happens to have braces and quotes in is somewhat unfortunate in this example. I think it's making it out to be more complicated than it really is. It's sort of, if you see that data, should you return it as a string, or should you return it as this is a JToken or whatever your encapsulation happens to be, that happens to be a string value, but could equally have been a null value or a number or whatever.
So
that
Klaus,
makes sense.
In Go, in the Go SDK, what happens is when you set up data content type, it's a signal. Your example, it lacks the other extensions like the MIME type and whatnot. So we actually look at just the media type, which is part of the data content type, but it's up until the first colon. We take that as a signal to figure out the data, which is a pointer to usually either a string or an object or a block of memory. Based on the content type, if it's an object, we load the appropriate marshaller and marshal that into some other data, usually a string. If it's a string and it's JSON, then it just goes in. If it's structured, if it's binary and a string, Go will not on the wire put the quotes in. So that's the special case to make sure that the quotes end up in the body of a binary payload. You can register other MIME type handlers, and then you can be given an object and run your whatever marshal and unmarshal logic that you need to.
Klaus, is there an example in here that you think really demonstrates the problem where it can be interpreted in more than one way?
It's really, if you look at this data encoded down there, this is supposed to illustrate what the SDK sees. So data encoded would be a variable, and this would be the value of that variable containing the data segment. If it's interpreted as JSON, it would look like this one you see down here. If it's interpreted as text, the outer quotes would not be there, and you would just have the inner quotes. That's the difference.
Yeah, that is the case of, right, the first set of quotes just says this data type is a string. On the wire, because this thing is a binary message, it needs the quotes because it originally was a string. So this is telling there's this block of text that's going to go out on the wire. It needs to have quote and then some escaped pieces and then end quote. Because when you know, especially when Go writes things like a string onto the HTTP buffer, it doesn't write the type quote, right? This, like if the data encoded was quote foo, you would only get foo on the wire, not quote foo unquote.
Yeah. So it can. I think I found the piece of code in the SDK. I could even share my screen or my window and then.
Yeah, go ahead and steal it here. Let me stop sharing.
Okay.
Go for it.
I hope this time sharing works, but I think the second time should.
Also, by all means, like if we're doing it wrong, let's make sure that they're interop, right? Like that's what I care about.
Can you see it now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's, I think, but Scott may correct me if I'm wrong, but I think inside the unmarshal method of for the event, you have this consume data, where it's specifically looking into the data attribute. And I think we can ignore this first is base 64 part because we are looking at that other case. And yes, it's right. It's the media type you're looking at, and then it's this check if it's application JSON or if it is text JSON. In that case, you call read string, so that causes the outer quotes to be stripped, I think. And in the other case, you just skip and return bytes. So you take the whole section of this data part as data encoded value. That's the difference, I think.
But I think this consume data has been already selected. We knew that it was either application JSON, text JSON beforehand, or something like that. There's a piece above this that selects the event consumer, I think, and I'd have to go double check because this code was it's fairly new as of like the V2.
Yeah, it's this optimized JSON handling, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
but
it's
that's
possible
just where I found this
there.
distinction. Yeah, it's really. I mean, it's not wrong. It's just how I've as I can read Go pretty much best from the among all those SDK languages. I just had a look at the Go SDK. That's just the reason. And I think that's just to illustrate the issue. I mean, you have to take that decision. If you read this, you have to decide, is it JSON or is it text, and it results in how you handle the quotes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because the text.plain or text/plain doesn't have quotes in the body, but it's still a string. Yes.
And if you forward that, then in binary, the quotes wouldn't be there anymore.
Yeah, and then if you send quote foo end quote as text.plain or text/plain, you would end up with double quotes. So, I mean, that's what the media type is really for. And JSON says all strings must be quoted. So we have to inject those for binary mode.
Mm-hmm. It's just that. I'm not sure if all SDKs do the same assumption regarding the media types. And so if that works and all SDKs handle all JSON-based media types the same way, then it's fine. It's just an ambiguity in the JSON format, how it is specified today, that could cause interop issues.
So Jem, you're asking some questions in the chat. You want to speak up?
I didn't know whether I should because I was joining really late, and I'm afraid I have to jump off again. I was just trying to understand at this point in the process, you've received a JSON formatted message. Is that correct? So you've already parsed it completely into a JSON tree. And at that point, don't you just inherently know whether the data is an object because the parser would have done that for you, or it's a string?
No, we never parse the entire message.
Or how do you know it's
first layer for structured?
But how do you know it's it's not badly formed if you haven't parsed it?
We only parse the top layer. So all the leaves are unknown types, and we have to inspect them. So there's a first pass to, if it's a structured message based on the headers, then we do a first pass parse of the top level of the tree to kind of figure out all the attributes, leaving the data alone and opaque. There's a minimum set of processing that happens for the data part, but really the Go SDK says, I'm going to wait until the user asks me to do something for the data payload piece. And if they choose to not do anything, then I'm basically just going to assume that it's opaque blob of bytes, and I'm going to trust everything.
So forgive my ignorance of Go then, or JSON parsing in Go. If the data property is the first leaf you come across, surely you have to have parsed that correctly to know when you've got to the end of it, because data could be just...
It comes out as a map. So basically you look at all the parser parses the tree and brings me back a map, and I can ask for keys, or I can iterate over the keys.
Oh, so I think the difference here is something does parse it. It's just it's not given back to the Go program in a parsed format. Put it that way.
So it's not like running it, I know, through the JSON parser in Java where it would just say, oh, that property called data is actually an object, or is actually a number, or is actually a string, for instance.
Yeah, the case we're looking at here is when data is always a string. So the JSON has been completely parsed all the way down to the leaves. The value of the JSON, the data property, is a string. And that's the case that we're looking at. So you don't need additional parsing. So the problem we're having is when that string, the value of that string happens to look like another JSON object, another JSON document that you could then parse again. And so what do we do in that case?
I get it. So it's from a purist perspective, it's a string, but somebody else has hinted that it may also be JSON. And now the question is the SDK the one that should be saying, oh, well, it's JSON, so I'll demarshal that for you into a JSON object?
That's not the whole problem, I think. So I try to make a more simple example. As John stated, this example with a JSON inside the string is maybe very confusing. So here it's just ABC.
Right.
And you would, in that JSON structured mode event, you would have a line like this.
Yep.
And if you understand that as a string and you forward that event in HTTP binary, the body would contain just ABC.
Yes.
If you understand this as a JSON value, because the data content type is application JSON, then the body of the HTTP binary event would look like this, because it has to be a valid JSON value again.
Got it.
Yeah, but I feel like I'm still missing something, because I don't see the problem with what you just said there. So where's the confusion?
If you're just looking at data content type application JSON, I think it's fine. But someone in that discussion noted, after looking at this registry of media types, that there's, I think, more than 100 media types that somehow have JSON inside.
I'm still missing something. So it seems to me that when you parse the first line in there, the data : ABC, it seems to me that hopefully we're all agreed that data is and I'm sorry. So the incoming message says data : ABC, and it's application JSON as the content type, right? So to me, if I was to say, okay, what is the value of data, right? Data is a 3-letter string, ABC, does not have quotes.
That's not valid JSON.
That's right.
No, I'm not saying it's valid JSON. I'm saying the value of data is a string of ABC. Now, when I serialize it as JSON, I agree with you. I have to put quotes around it. But data itself is a string of just ABC.
Right. So that, and I think that's the point. It's not valid. The data is not valid JSON. You can't, if data is just a string of ABC, the content type is not JSON. It's a string.
Well,
I see.
Got
it.
But this is the whole point of cloud events, right? Like if the data is a string and we would like to project it into a binary HTTP message, the marshaller, as it's going out the wire, adds the quotes to make it a valid parsable piece of JSON.
Right, so are you guys saying that the first 2 lines there that Klaus is showing is technically an error condition?
Yes.
I agree. Okay, good. We're on the same
Why?
page. Thank you.
Well, you can't say the data, data content type something plus JSON and then present a data construct which is not JSON.
It is.
It's not. It's just a string.
A string is also a valid JSON
This
value.
case is supported by the Cloud Events SDK. You just have to add the marshaller. You have to basically register the application /something plus JSON. And when it pulls the media type, it will delegate to you.
I'm having horrible flashbacks. I think we had this discussion before because I think the case I'm thinking of now is, what if instead of quote ABC quotes, there were curly braces there instead with something inside the curly brace?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, my head wasn't on straight. It's a valid JSON value. That's the point. Yeah. So you absolutely can put a string there.
Yeah, for some of the deficiencies of the original Go SDK was I didn't know how to handle anything except for actual objects. So things like pure, like true or false or nil or a string or an array was really difficult to parse because there's a bunch of special case that you have to do because of the problem of converting the thing that is represented by data into a version of it that's parsable in binary mode.
So I got a question for you guys. The second line there, quote ABC on data. I agree that's valid now. So what I said earlier was wrong. However, if someone says ignoring serialization stuff, what is the value of data? Isn't it ABC?
So let's see. So if you base 64 ABC.
But I guess, no, what I'm trying to say is the quotes there, aren't the quotes there aren't the quotes appearing there because we're serializing it as JSON, not because the quotes are part of the actual data of the event?
The quotes are there because of the data content type that you've chosen. So add in this other example. If you chose to do data base 64, the actual data is YWJ under a little j, right? It's exactly the same thing, but now this thing is interpreted as a base 64 encoded string.
And does your base 64 encoded string, the WIJJ, does that have the quotes inside there? If I decode that,
you only use this in structured mode, so it is a quoted string. It never goes. You never represent database 64 on the binary format because it is already binary. If you want to do binary format, just say it's application binary or whatever it is, and send the bytes out.
No, I would think I was asking a different question. I'm saying if I actually take the 4 characters you type there and run them through a decoder, will I see quotes?
No,
right?
Because the data doesn't have quotes.
Exactly.
I think that's the key problem here, right? Like in both cases of data is pointing to the quoted string ABC, and a binary message encoded as JSON, they're exactly the same key, right? They're the same data, and the marshaller handles that leaf in the same exact way.
Yeah.
So do we just need to add text to the spec to make it clear that cases like this, the data itself is ABC and the quotes are simply there because we are choosing to serialize it in JSON?
I think so. If you have the non-projected encoding of what data means, the data is the type string value ABC, no quotes. But we interpret the quotes as meaning that the type is a string.
Well, maybe the ambiguity is that data can be just a JSON value or a text as JSON string.
But if it's so the line we drew with the Go SDK is that if the user provides data as a string and not an object, so something that doesn't have to get complex unmarshaled, or sorry, marshaled, we treat it as a string and we don't look inside. It's opaque. You've done something to it and I don't care.
Yes, yeah, sure. I mean, it's not about parsing it or something. It's just for that case that you receive a structured mode event and forward it in binary mode. You have to know what to put into the body, if you have to keep the quotes or if you don't.
So Lance, you pasted something into the chat. Klaus, since you're sharing, maybe you can click on that and Lance, you can talk to it.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of on the other end. This is on the receiving end as opposed to on the sending end, right? But I noticed a difference in the way SDK JavaScript behaved versus SDK Go, and I kind of just assumed Go was the canonical one. So I added this hack because of exactly what we're talking about, like the fact that you can receive a string without the quotes in it, and the data content type is application JSON. The JavaScript parser will blow up. I mean, the built-in, Node.js JSON parser will blow up if you don't explicitly add those quotes. And so we're doing that because if we receive something that says that it's application JSON, but the body of the incoming message is just, ABC without the quote marks, we accept that as valid JSON.
That's interesting. I think so. In Go, we on the outside or on outbound, we added the quotes if it's this funny case of you're sending a JSON string, because when you interpret the body of a binary message, you have to treat it as not a string but a set of bytes. And so when you're parsing the set of bytes, you find the quote and you say, okay, cool, it's a string. And then if it doesn't end with an end quote, then it's an invalid JSON string. I think that's probably the fundamental difference here is that, better or how would you know the difference between like if line 405 didn't have the quotes and you give this to the parser as a binary block of data, how does the parser know that that's a string versus just some random characters? And it gets even more difficult if you add in like a curly brace at the start of that.
Well, I guess I'm confused. Well, actually, Klaus, can you add another line after 405 and just say ABC? Right?
Like
That's what you were just talking there, right, Scott? If you do a binary mode where the body is just ABC by itself, isn't that invalid JSON?
That's invalid JSON. Well, but it's a valid key, but the parser doesn't know how to read it.
It's invalid JSON.
Yeah.
Right. But is someone saying that it's valid?
Well, it sounds like what JavaScript does is assumes that the inbound body is a string and kind of assumes that it's quoted, and Go doesn't do that.
Well, I mean, I don't remember exactly how I tested this, but I feel like I was basically using curl to send an HTTP encoded event where the body was just a string without any quotes around it, and Go parsed it fine. But it's been a while since I wrote this. I don't really remember what tests I did.
It seems to me that we may need someone to just write up the various cases that are leading to ambiguity or to differences in the SDKs. And at a spec level, it seems like we should look at each one and say, verbally, not in a language specific way, just in English, say, this is how data should be interpreted.
Yeah. And then we can add that to the conformance tests and run them.
Right.
I think essentially all SDKs need to be in sync, which data content type is to be handled in which way.
I would agree.
You can always user extend them. So if I have application Klaus plus cloud event or plus emoji base emoji, maybe you want to have the opportunity to have a custom marshaller.
Well, we could also say that everything with this plus JSON is interpreted as JSON. I don't know, something like this. But well, if I had to specify this structured format or this JSON format again today, I would have 3 different values or keys for data. So data JSON, data text, and data base64.
But I don't think that solves the problem of the binary versus structured mode of encoding, because you still run into this interesting issue of, is it quoted or not on the wire?
Well, at least then the receiving side always knows what decision was taken on the sending side.
So Klaus, would you be willing to take an action item to just write down, the cases that seem to be causing a headache?
I can try, yes.
Because you don't have to say what each SDK does with it, and just say, here are some sample formats or sample cloud events, either in binary or structured. I assume structured is the real problem child here, but maybe binary is part of the issue as well. Here are some sample messages that different SDKs might interpret differently. You don't have to say what they do, just say they might interpret them differently. And then we as a group can say from spec level how each one should be interpreted and see whether we're all in agreement or not.
Yeah, I might add a third projection of the conical version. So like, what type is the data? What does it look like without programmerisms? Like, here's my object, the true types that I mean, the data that it actually is, right? Because I think the part of the problem is that this issue of quotes or no quotes, or escaped or not escaped, or do we interpret, how many times we unquote things and stuff like that. So a version of the data of what is the data really? Like, if you parsed it, what would you end up with?
Right.
Or what would you like to end up with? Or what did you start with?
Yep. Yeah, I think it's the same thing, just looking at the other direction, rather than taking a cloud event message, how to interpret it. You're saying, here's my data. What does the cloud event look like in the different ways to show it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that would be super helpful for me in terms of understanding how to implement this stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So Klaus, you said
I can try to find some example and to illustrate the problem.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I know for a fact one deficiency of the Cloud Events SDKs. I don't attempt to know how to parse non-UTF-8 encoded strings. So if you send like wacky encodings, you're out of luck.
I'm taking some notes here just a sec. Okay, let me share my screen again. Where am I going? Okay, so class, let me do this, AI. Okay, so I think we need two sets of examples. One that shows CEs that are ambiguous for parsing. Back to parsing. And then some that says, okay, here's some data, and it's unclear how to serialize it into a CE. Okay, cool. And I believe, let me just double check, we lost John, so we can't talk about his stuff. Okay. Any other topics people want to bring up? I think next week, if Clemens remembers from his vacation, Clemens will be talking about schema registry. But anything else people want to bring up for topics? Okay, let me just double check. I don't think anybody added anything to Discovery Interrupt. Nothing. Okay. So last chance, any topic for anything? Otherwise, we will adjourn for both phone calls. All right, cool. In that case, we are done a little early. Okay, thank you all. Have a good rest of your day. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Have a great one.
Bye.